The Citadel Code, the philosophy of the medieval knight and noble. Chapter 1. The foundations of chivalric philosophy. In the stone heart of a medieval citadel, where thick battlements rose defiantly against the sky, and the great hall echoed with the solemn oaths of armored men, the knight and noble lived by a philosophy far older and deeper than any single lifetime. This was the code of chivalry, a complete way of life that fused martial skill with moral discipline, Christian duty with feudal loyalty, and personal honor with the sacred responsibility to defend order. Far from being mere romantic tales of knights in shining armor, chivalry emerged as a practical response to the harsh realities of feudal Europe between the late 11th and 15th centuries. It sought to civilize the warrior class, transforming potentially destructive armed elites into guardians of faith, realm, and the common good. The term chivalry itself derives from the Old French chevalerie, rooted in cheval, meaning horse. It originally referred to the mounted warrior elite, the heavy cavalry who formed the backbone of medieval armies. By the High Middle Ages, however, it had evolved into a broader ethical framework. Historians trace its formal development to northern France between roughly 1170 and 1220, though its roots stretch back further to the Carolingian era and the idealization of Charlemagne's cavalry. As the feudal system took hold after the collapse of centralized Roman authority, society organized around land grants in exchange for military service. Knights and nobles, often of noble birth or elevated through prowess, received fiefs and owed allegiance to their lords. Without a guiding code, these heavily armed horsemen could become little more than armed bandits preying on the weak. Chivalry provided the necessary restraints and aspirations. At its core, chivalric philosophy rejected raw power for power's sake. It insisted that the knight and noble's strength existed for a higher purpose: to serve God, protect the church, defend the realm, and shield those unable to defend themselves. Essential virtues included courage in battle, loyalty to one's lord and comrades, honor in all dealings, justice tempered by mercy, generosity to the less fortunate, and unwavering Christian piety. These were not abstract ideals confined to literature. They were lived daily within the walls of citadels and castles across Europe. The citadel itself embodied the philosophy. Unlike the outer bailey or town walls, the citadel served as the ultimate inner stronghold, the last refuge during sieges and the administrative and residential core of lordship. Here, thick stone towers, deep moats, drawbridges, and fortified gates created a world apart. Inside, the knight and noble trained, prayed, governed, and prepared for war. The citadel symbolized both physical defense and moral order. Its unyielding walls mirrored the knight and noble's steadfast character, while its great hall hosted feasts, councils, and the transmission of the code to the next generation of squires. Daily life in the citadel reinforced the foundations of chivalry from sunrise to complin. A typical day began before dawn with the knight rising for prayer or overseeing the arming of horses and men. Training occupied much of the morning: sword drills, lance practice on the quintain, horsemanship exercises in the bailey. These were not mere exercises in violence. They built the disciplined prowess essential to protecting the weak rather than exploiting them. Mid-morning often brought attendance at Mass in the Citadel chapel, where the knight laid his sword upon the altar as an offering, reminding himself that martial skill was a divine gift to be used righteously. Noon might find him in the great hall adjudicating disputes among vassals, or hearing petitions from peasants. Here the virtue of justice came alive. Decisions weighed evidence and custom, balancing severity with compassion. Afternoons could involve hunting to hone skills and provide meat, or overseeing estate management, ensuring fields were tended, stores secured against famine, and defenses maintained. Evenings brought counsel with the Lord, discussion of strategy, or feasts where tales of heroic deeds reinforced the code. Throughout, loyalty remained paramount. The knight swore fealty not as empty ritual, but as a binding oath before God and men. This philosophy did not arise in a vacuum. It drew from several converging influences: First, the martial traditions of Germanic warrior cultures emphasized bravery and loyalty to one's lord. Second, the Christianization of Europe, accelerated by the Carolingian Renaissance, infused these traditions with religious purpose. Knights were called to defend the faith, especially during the Crusades beginning in 1095, where fighting for the Holy Land elevated the warrior's role to that of miles Christi, soldier of Christ. Third, the rise of courtly literature and troubadour poetry in the 12th century added layers of refinement. Works such as the Song of Roland, circa 1100, portrayed the ideal knight as fiercely loyal, courageous to the point of death, and devoted to his lord and God. Later, Ramon Lull's Book of the Order of Chivalry, circa 1275, provided a more systematic treatise, outlining the knight's duties in clear, moral terms. Practical military needs also drove the code's development. As tournaments became popular social and training events from the 12th century onward, rules emerged to prevent chaos and encourage honorable conduct. Commanders recognized that undisciplined knights posed risks to their own forces and to civilian populations. A professional code helped maintain cohesion, encourage generous treatment of defeated enemies when politically useful, and uphold the reputation of the noble class. Figures like William Marshall, often called the greatest knight that ever lived, embodied these ideals in practice. Rising from tournament champion to regent of England, Marshall demonstrated unwavering loyalty, courage, and honor, even when serving multiple masters across shifting alliances. His life showed that chivalry, while aspirational, could be lived with remarkable consistency. Yet the philosophy was never a rigid legal code enforced uniformly. It remained an informal, evolving set of expectations shaped by region, time, and circumstance. In times of crusade or holy war, piety and defense of the church took precedence. During feudal conflicts, loyalty to one's lord often weighed heaviest. In peacetime within the Citadel, governance and generosity came to the fore. What unified all expressions was the conviction that the armed noble held a sacred trust. Strength without virtue descended into tyranny. Virtue without strength left the innocent defenseless. The Citadel stood as both literal and symbolic center of this world view. Its design, concentric walls, commanding towers, secure keep, reflected layered defense mirroring the layered virtues of the knight and noble. Outer walls protected the wider lands and populace. Inner citadel protected the lord, his family, and the core garrison. Similarly, the knight and noble's outer prowess in arms protected the realm, while his inner character, honor, piety, self-mastery, safeguarded his soul and the moral order he upheld. Young pages and squires raised within these walls absorbed the code through observation and instruction. They learned that knighthood demanded not only the ability to wield a sword, but the wisdom to know when and why to draw it. By the 14th and 15th centuries, as plate armor reached its peak and gunpowder began to challenge traditional warfare, chivalry acquired more romantic and idealized tones in literature. Arthurian legends, chansons de geste, and illuminated manuscripts spread the image of the perfect knight across Europe. Yet at its foundations, the philosophy remained grounded in harsh reality. The need to restrain violence, foster loyalty, and maintain social order in an age of constant threat from invasion, rebellion, and famine. In the torchlit halls of the Citadel, the knight and noble understood his place in a divine hierarchy. God ruled the heavens, kings and emperors ruled by divine right, lords governed their domains, and knights executed justice on the ground. Each level bore responsibility proportional to its power. The philosophy taught that neglecting this duty invited chaos, both earthly and spiritual. Thus, every act within the citadel walls, from polishing armor to hearing mass to rendering judgment, became an act of philosophy in motion. This foundational vision of chivalry offered coherence amid the turbulence of the medieval world. It provided a moral compass for men trained from boyhood to kill and conquer. It elevated the brutal necessities of warfare into a vocation of service. And it insisted that true nobility arose not merely from birth or battlefield success, but from daily adherence to virtues that transcended self-interest. In the stone citadel, where wind whistled through arrow slits and banners stirred above the battlements, the knight and noble stood as living proof that strength, rightly ordered by faith and honor, could become a force for stability and good. The code's endurance across centuries testifies to its power. Though specific customs varied, Norman knights differed somewhat from those in the Holy Roman Empire or Iberian Peninsula. The underlying principles remained remarkably consistent: courage without recklessness, loyalty without servility, piety without hypocrisy, and protection of the weak as sacred duty. These foundations would be elaborated in the virtues explored in subsequent chapters, but they all rest upon this central truth. The knight and noble existed not to dominate, but to defend, not to glorify himself, but to uphold a higher order under God. The Citadel Code, the philosophy of the medieval knight and noble. Chapter 2. Honor, the unbreakable foundation. Honor formed the bedrock of the knight and noble's existence. It meant a man's word was as solid as the citadel's curtain walls, thick, unyielding, and built to withstand every assault. Falsehood was corrosion. Once spoken, it weakened every future vow and ate away at the very structure that held knightly society together. The knight measured every decision against this standard, refusing compromise even when victory seemed to demand it. In the council chamber or on the field of battle, he spoke truth plainly, accepting the consequences without flinching. Honor was both inherited from noble lineage and earned daily through consistent conduct. It served as a legacy for his sons and a shield against shame that no armor could replace. It demanded self-examination as stern as any foe's lance. A knight who broke faith lost more than land or title. He lost the respect that made him noble in the eyes of peers, lord, and God. Through honor, the sword became an instrument of righteousness rather than mere violence. In the medieval world, honor was not a vague feeling or personal preference. It was a public and sacred reputation, the currency of the knightly class. A knight's name carried weight far beyond his physical presence. When he gave his word, whether pledging fealty, promising safe conduct to a defeated enemy, or swearing to uphold a truce, it bound him as tightly as any iron chain. Breaking that word invited not only earthly punishment, but spiritual damnation, for oaths were sworn before God in the Citadel chapel. The knight understood that his honor reflected upon his entire lineage. A single act of deceit could tarnish the family arms displayed proudly on his surcoat and shield for generations. This uncompromising stance on truth shaped daily life inside the citadel. In the Great Hall, when disputes arose between vassals over land, tithes, or grievances, the knight rendered judgment with plain speech. He did not soften harsh realities to please powerful men, nor exaggerate to curry favor. His decisions rested on custom, evidence, and justice, spoken without fear of reprisal. On the battlefield or during siege, the same principle held. If he offered terms of surrender, those terms were kept even if the enemy later proved treacherous. Mercy extended under oath could not be retracted for convenience. Such consistency built trust among allies and even earned grudging respect from foes. Historical examples illustrate how deeply honor was woven into chivalric practice. The Song of Roland, one of the earliest and most influential chansons de geste from around 1100, presents Roland as the epitome of knightly honor. Despite his rash pride, Roland refuses to sound his Oliphant horn for aid until it is too late, preferring death with honor over any stain of perceived cowardice. His loyalty to Charlemagne and his concern for leaving his sword Durendal untainted by enemy hands underscore that honor extended even beyond life itself. The poem codified many chivalric expectations: to live by honor and for glory, to speak truth at all times, to persevere in every enterprise, and to guard the honor of fellow knights. These ideals resonated across Europe, shaping how knights viewed their conduct in war and peace. Another towering figure was William Marshal, often called the greatest knight that ever lived. Rising from a landless younger son to regent of England, Marshal exemplified honor through unwavering loyalty and integrity across shifting political winds. He served multiple kings, Henry II, Richard the Lionheart, and John, without betraying oaths, even when it cost him favor or fortune. In tournaments, where knights competed fiercely for prizes, ransom, and reputation, Marshal gained renown not only for prowess, but for honorable conduct. He avoided unnecessary cruelty, honored truces, and treated defeated opponents with dignity. His biography, written shortly after his death, portrays a man who measured every action against the standard of honor, refusing to break faith even when lesser men urged pragmatism. Honor also manifested powerfully in the tournament circuit that flourished from the 12th century onward. These mock battles served as training for real war, while providing a public stage for displaying virtue. A knight entered the lists not merely to win horses, armor, and ransoms, but to prove his worth. Cheating, striking from behind, or attacking an unhorsed opponent brought lasting shame. Crowds and noble ladies watched closely. Reputation earned in the tournament field could open doors to patronage, marriage alliances, or command in royal armies. Yet true honor required restraint. The knight who fought cleanly, spared a worthy opponent, or yielded gracefully when defeated, gained more admiration than the brute who triumphed through dishonorable means. Tournaments thus reinforced that honor was performative, yet deeply internal, a balance of public deed and private conscience. Inside the Citadel, honor demanded rigorous self-examination. The knight regularly reflected in the chapel or during quiet hours in the solar. Had he spoken truthfully in council? Had he kept every promise made to vassals or family? Had pride led him to offend where courtesy was due? This introspection mirrored the spiritual discipline of monks, adapting contemplative practice to the warrior's life. Ramon Lull, in his Book of the Order of Chivalry, written around 1275, emphasized that the knight must embody virtues worthy of his high station. Honor was not granted automatically by dubbing. It required constant effort to maintain. Lull argued that a knight who failed in honor betrayed the very purpose of his order, to uphold justice, protect the weak, and serve God faithfully. The consequences of lost honor were severe and far-reaching. A knight proven false might face formal degradation, his spurs hacked off, his shield reversed, and his name cried out as traitor in the public square. More insidiously, social ostracism followed. Allies withdrew support, lords questioned his reliability, and peasants whispered of a faithless master. In extreme cases, excommunication loomed if the broken oath involved the church. Families suffered as well. Daughters found suitors scarce, sons inherited diminished prospects. Thus, honor functioned as both personal armor and collective safeguard, binding the knightly class together through mutual accountability. Yet honor was not cold rigidity. It allowed for mercy and generosity when these did not compromise truth. A knight could pardon a repentant foe or show largesse to the defeated without falsehood. The key was consistency. Actions must align with declared principles. This flexibility prevented honor from becoming mere stubbornness while preserving its core as unyielding integrity. In the harsh realities of medieval warfare, sieges that could last months, battles where thousands fell, and political intrigues that toppled kingdoms, honor provided moral clarity. When supplies ran low and disease stalked the citadel, the knight's word to ration fairly or negotiate honestly maintained discipline among hungry troops. When victory seemed certain but required betraying a safe conduct, he refused, knowing short-term gain would poison long-term trust. Such choices often proved wise. A reputation for honor could end conflicts more swiftly than force, as enemies preferred surrendering to a trustworthy foe rather than fighting to the death. The citadel itself stood as a monument to this virtue. Its massive curtain walls, built layer upon layer of stone, symbolized the layered defenses of an honorable life. Outer prowess in arms protecting the realm, inner truthfulness safeguarding the soul. Banners fluttering from towers displayed heraldic arms that proclaimed ancestral honor and personal vows. Every stone laid, every gate reinforced, reminded the knight that his fortress was only as strong as the character dwelling within it. Honor elevated the knight above the common soldier and the mere brigand. While mercenaries fought for coin and outlaws for plunder, the knight fought for something greater: reputation, duty, and divine approval. This distinction justified his privileged status. Lands, tithes, and authority came with the heavy obligation to live honorably. Neglect that obligation, and the justification for his power crumbled. Through honor, violence itself found purpose. The sword, sharp and gleaming, became more than a tool of death. It enforced oaths, defended the innocent, and upheld justice. A knight who wielded it dishonorably reduced himself to a thug in expensive armor. One who wielded it with integrity transformed potential brutality into a force for order and good. In the torchlit halls and training yards of the Citadel, young squires learned these lessons by observation and direct instruction. They watched their lord speak truth to powerful visitors, keep promises made in lean times, and accept defeat in tournament with grace rather than excuses. They absorbed that honor was not inherited passively, but actively maintained through countless small choices each day. A forgotten courtesy, a convenient half-truth, or a broken minor vow could begin the slow erosion that led to ruin. Thus, honor stood as the unbreakable foundation of chivalric philosophy. It provided the moral architecture upon which all other virtues rested. Without it, courage became recklessness, loyalty became blind obedience, and piety became empty ritual. With it, the knight and noble could face siege, intrigue, or the quiet demands of governance with unshakable resolve. In an age of constant uncertainty, honor offered certainty. A man who kept faith with his word kept faith with God, his Lord, and himself. The citadel might eventually crumble under cannon fire centuries later, but the ideal of honor it sheltered would echo through history as one of the Middle Ages' most enduring legacies. The Citadel Code, the philosophy of the medieval knight and noble. Chapter 3. Loyalty, the chain that binds. Loyalty formed the iron chain that bound the medieval knight and noble to his lord, his comrades, and the feudal order that sustained the realm. In an age of shifting alliances, constant warfare, and fragile political structures, loyalty was far more than polite allegiance. It was the glue holding society together. Betrayal constituted spiritual treason, a sin that could stain a bloodline for generations and invite divine judgment as well as earthly ruin. For the knight standing watch on the citadel's battlements or kneeling in its chapel, loyalty was not an abstract ideal, but a daily lived reality that demanded sacrifice, discipline, and unyielding resolve. The foundation of this loyalty lay in the solemn ceremony of homage and the oath of fealty. A knight seeking to enter or affirm service would appear before his lord bareheaded and unarmed, a sign of complete submission. He knelt, clasped his hands as in prayer, and extended them to the Lord, who enclosed them in his own. In this posture of total vulnerability, the knight swore his oath, to be faithful, to serve in valor, to defend the Lord's honor and lands against all enemies, and to observe his homage completely, in good faith and without deceit. The oath was often sworn upon holy relics or the Gospels, making it a sacred bond before God as well as men. The Lord, in turn, accepted the homage and granted protection and land in exchange. This mutual exchange created a personal, sacred contract that elevated loyalty beyond mere employment to a profound moral and spiritual duty. Inside the Citadel, loyalty manifested in countless practical acts of service. The knight trained squires with patience and rigor, passing on not only martial skills, but the understanding that their future oaths would bind them as tightly as his own. He stood long watches on cold towers, scanning the horizon for threats to his lord's domain. He offered honest counsel in the great hall, even when it risked displeasure, because true loyalty included speaking truth for the good of the whole. He maintained weapons, horses, and stores, ensuring the garrison remained ready. These routine duties reinforced the chain. Every repaired wall, every drilled formation, and every shared meal strengthened the collective fidelity that made the Citadel a fortress in more than stone alone. Feudal hierarchy mirrored divine order in the knight's mind. God ruled the heavens. Kings ruled by divine right. Lords governed their domains under the king, and knights executed justice and defense on the ground. Each rank had its appointed role. When every level fulfilled its duty faithfully, the realm endured storms of invasion, rebellion, and famine. Disruption at any link, whether a knight's disloyalty or a lord's injustice, threatened the entire structure. The knight understood this interconnectedness deeply. His personal ambition had to yield before sworn duty, for only through collective fidelity could order survive the tempests of war and intrigue. Loyalty proved its worth most dramatically in battle. When enemy forces advanced, loyalty transformed scattered individuals into an unbreakable line. Comrades fought shoulder to shoulder, trusting that none would flee or break formation. The knight charged not for personal glory but because retreat would betray his lord and the men beside him. In the press of combat, this bond turned fear into resolve. Even when wounded or outnumbered, loyalty kept men standing where self-preservation might have prompted flight. Historical accounts from the period show how such cohesion often decided the outcome when discipline held against superior numbers or surprise attacks. The reciprocal nature of loyalty gave the system strength. The knight expected justice and protection from his lord in return for his service. A lord who failed to shield his vassals or reward faithful service risked losing their allegiance. In practice, this reciprocity encouraged responsible lordship while binding knights to honorable conduct. Protection flowed downward as well. The knight extended defense to the peasants and villagers under his lord's banner, seeing their safety as part of his sworn duty. In this way, loyalty created a web of mutual obligation that stabilized feudal society. Nowhere was the cost and glory of loyalty more evident than in the life of William Marshal, widely regarded as one of the greatest knights of the Middle Ages. Marshal served 5 English kings: Henry the Young King, Henry II, Richard I, John, and Henry III, with remarkable consistency across turbulent decades. When Henry II faced rebellion from his own sons, including the future Richard the Lionheart, Marshal remained loyal to the aging king until the end. In one famous incident during the conflict, Marshal even unhorsed Richard in battle, but spared his life, refusing to kill an unarmed opponent. Richard later forgave him and valued Marshal's steadfastness more highly than those who had switched sides. Marshal continued this pattern under Richard, governing England faithfully while the king crusaded in the Holy Land. Even during the difficult reign of King John and the baronial conflicts leading to Magna Carta, Marshal stayed loyal, ultimately serving as regent for the young Henry III. His life demonstrated that true loyalty navigated complex politics without descending into blind obedience or easy betrayal. It required wisdom, courage, and an unshakable commitment to sworn oaths. Literary traditions reinforced these ideals. In the Song of Roland, one of the most influential chansons de geste, Roland embodies fierce loyalty to Charlemagne. Despite overwhelming odds at Roncevaux Pass, Roland and his companions refused to call for aid out of pride at first, but their ultimate sacrifice stems from unwavering devotion to lord and comrades. The friendship between Roland and Oliver highlights another facet: loyalty among peers, where companions fought, argued, and forgave one another yet never abandoned the cause. Such tales, recited in Citadel halls during feasts, inspired knights to emulate these virtues and reminded them of the eternal shame awaiting those who broke faith. During sieges, loyalty faced its sternest test. When an enemy army encircled the citadel, cutting off supplies and bombarding the walls, fear and despair could easily take root. Yet loyalty transformed these trials into moments of collective resolve. Knights rationed food, repaired breaches under fire, and led sorties to disrupt besiegers. They comforted the civilians sheltering inside and maintained discipline among the garrison. The knowledge that abandonment meant betraying lord, comrades, and the sacred oath sustained them through hunger, disease, and exhaustion. Successful defense often hinged more on this unbreakable spirit than on superior numbers or fortifications alone. Loyalty extended beyond the grave in the knight's worldview. A knight who died faithfully in service earned honor for his lineage and prayers for his soul. Conversely, betrayal brought lasting infamy. Families of traitors could face confiscation of lands, loss of titles, and social ostracism. This long-term consequence reinforced the gravity of the oath. Young squires raised in the citadel absorbed these lessons daily, watching how senior knights balanced personal interests against sworn duty. They learned that loyalty was not weakness, but the highest form of strength, the strength that held civilization together when chaos threatened. In times of peace, loyalty expressed itself through diligent governance and counsel. The knight advised his lord honestly on matters of justice, estate management, and defense. He ensured taxes were collected fairly and that the weak received protection. These quieter duties were no less important than battlefield heroics. They maintained the order that made warfare less frequent and less destructive. Ultimately, loyalty stood as the central chain in the chivalric code. Without it, courage became mere bravado, honor an empty boast, and piety a private comfort disconnected from communal responsibility. The knight inside the stone citadel understood that his armored strength gained true purpose only when placed in faithful service. Through loyalty, personal ambition submitted to a greater good, individual warriors formed cohesive forces, and the feudal realm endured across generations of war and uncertainty. This virtue, sworn upon relics and lived in daily obedience, transformed the potentially chaotic world of armed nobles into a structured society capable of defending faith, land, and the innocent. The chain that bound the knight to his lord also bound him to something higher, the divine order reflected in earthly ranks. In fulfilling his oaths with steadfast heart, the knight and noble not only secured his own soul, but contributed to the stability of the realm under God. In the torchlit halls and wind-swept battlements of the citadel, loyalty remained the quiet, unyielding force that made all other virtues possible. The Citadel Code, the philosophy of the medieval knight and noble. Chapter 4. Courage, the active virtue. Courage was neither blind rage nor idle boast. It was the deliberate choice to face danger with clear purpose. The knight trained from boyhood so that sword and lance became extensions of will. On the battlefield he charged the breach not for glory, but because retreat betrayed those behind the walls. Moral courage matched physical bravery. He spoke unwelcome truth in council and upheld justice when easier paths beckoned. Fear was acknowledged yet mastered. In the citadel yard he practiced until instinct replaced hesitation. Courage protected the realm and refined the soul, turning potential brutality into disciplined defense. This active virtue stood at the heart of chivalric philosophy. Unlike mere recklessness, which invited unnecessary death and chaos, courage demanded discipline, preparation, and unwavering resolve. It transformed the knight from a skilled fighter into a guardian of order. In the stone citadel, where thick walls sheltered the lord, his family, and the surrounding lands, courage was not an occasional outburst, but a daily habit forged through years of rigorous training and tested in the crucible of war. Training for courage began early. From the age of 7 or 8, a boy destined for knighthood served as a page in a noble household or local castle. He learned basic horsemanship, handled mock weapons, and performed menial tasks that built endurance and humility. By his teens, as a squire, he assisted a seasoned knight, caring for armor, weapons, and horses, while intensifying combat drills. Sword practice, lance work on the quintain, wrestling, and riding exercises filled the mornings in the Citadel yard or bailey. These sessions were relentless. A squire swung heavy wooden swords until his arms burned, charged at targets on horseback, and sparred with older warriors. The goal was not brute force alone, but controlled power. To strike accurately under pressure, to maintain formation amid chaos, and to keep fighting even when wounded. Such preparation ensured that courage became instinctive. In the heat of battle, hesitation could doom an entire line. The knight practiced until movements flowed without conscious thought, parrying, thrusting, wheeling his destrier to face new threats. Tournaments provided vital testing grounds. These mock battles, popular from the 12th century onward, allowed knights to hone skills safely while demonstrating prowess before lords and ladies. Yet even tournaments carried risk. Broken bones and concussions were common. Through repeated exposure to danger in controlled settings, the knight learned to master fear rather than deny it. On the battlefield, physical courage revealed itself in decisive action. When enemies breached the outer defenses or assaulted the citadel walls, the knight did not shrink back. He charged the gap because retreat would abandon the weak sheltered inside, women, children, peasants, and the lord's household. Historical examples abound of this spirit. William Marshall, often hailed as the greatest knight of the age, repeatedly demonstrated calculated bravery. In one early exploit, he protected Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine during an ambush, fighting fiercely despite his horse being killed and suffering serious wounds. Later, defending King Henry II against his own son Richard, the future Lionheart, Marshall charged directly at Richard but deliberately struck only the prince's horse, sparing the man while fulfilling his duty. Even in old age, Marshall broke into a castle single-handedly to capture a key enemy leader. His courage was never reckless. It served loyalty and protection. The Song of Roland, the great 11th century chanson de geste, immortalized ideal battlefield courage through the figure of Roland, Charlemagne's nephew. Ambushed at Roncevaux Pass with a small rear guard, Roland and his companion Oliver faced overwhelming Saracen forces. Oliver urged sounding the horn to summon aid, but Roland refused at first, viewing it as cowardice that would dishonor his lord. He fought on with superhuman valor, felling countless foes with his sword Durendal, until the situation grew hopeless. Only then did he blow the horn, bursting his temples with the effort, summoning Charlemagne too late to save the rear guard, but ensuring vengeance. Roland's courage blended fierce prowess with ultimate loyalty, even as Oliver provided the wiser counterbalance, urging prudence alongside bravery. The epic taught that true courage accepted death rather than betray one's oath. Moral courage often proved harder than physical valor. In the Citadel's great hall, during councils with the lord and other nobles, the knight might need to voice unwelcome truths, advising against a rash campaign, questioning a harsh tax on peasants, or defending a weaker vassal's rights, required standing firm when powerful voices opposed him. Upholding justice in judgment, punishing a favored retainer, or showing mercy to a repentant foe demanded similar inner strength. Easier paths always beckoned: flattery, silence, or personal gain. Moral courage rejected them, recognizing that compromising virtue eroded the very order the knight was sworn to defend. Fear was never absent. Medieval battles were horrific, arrows darkening the sky, the crash of lances, the screams of wounded men and horses, the stench of blood and smoke. A knight might feel terror clawing at his gut as he lowered his visor and spurred forward. Yet courage meant acknowledging that fear and mastering it through faith, training, and duty. Piety reinforced this mastery. Before battle, the knight attended Mass in the Citadel chapel, offering his sword at the altar and praying for strength. He saw himself as Miles Christie, a soldier of Christ, whose courage served divine justice against chaos and unbelief. This spiritual anchor steadied him when human limits pressed hardest. Courage also manifested in endurance during sieges. When an enemy army encircled the Citadel, cutting off supplies, the knight rationed food, maintained watches on the battlements, and led sorties to disrupt besiegers. Long nights on the walls, exposed to rain and enemy fire, tested resolve as surely as any charge. He encouraged the garrison with steady words, his deep, resonant voice carrying over the stone. Defeat might come, but surrender without exhausting every honorable option betrayed those inside. The philosophy distinguished courage from foolhardiness. Reckless charges that wasted lives or abandoned positions served no one. Prudence, another knightly virtue, guided courage, assessing risks, conserving strength, and striking when the moment favored victory or necessary defense. Temperance prevented courage from descending into pride. After a successful defense or tournament win, the knight gave thanks in chapel rather than boasting in the hall, remembering that skill and fortune both came from God. In daily citadel life, courage appeared in quieter forms. Training squires demanded patience and firmness. A knight corrected errors sternly, yet encouraged growth, knowing his charges would one day face real battle. Overseeing estate defenses, repairing walls, stocking stores, organizing patrols, required steady commitment even in peacetime. When famine or plague struck the lands, courage meant riding out to organize relief or confront bandits, placing himself at risk to protect the vulnerable. Ultimately, courage refined the soul. It elevated the knight above the common mercenary who fought for coin alone. Raw strength without courage led to tyranny or cowardice under pressure. Courage without virtue became brutality. Disciplined by honor, loyalty, piety, and justice, courage turned the warrior into a pillar of the realm. It protected the citadel not merely with steel, but with moral example. Young squires watching their lord charge into danger or speak truth in council absorbed the lesson. True manhood faced peril for a higher cause. Across medieval Europe, this active virtue sustained feudal society. Whether Norman knights in England, French paladins in the Crusades, or Iberian warriors against Moorish forces, courage, physical and moral, held the line against invasion and internal disorder. It inspired literature, from the Song of Roland to Arthurian tales, and lived in the deeds of men like William Marshall, who rose from tournament champion to regent through consistent valor and loyalty. In the torchlit yard of the Citadel, as the knight practiced until sweat soaked his gambeson and his muscles ached, he built more than fighting skill. He forged the inner fortress that would stand when outer walls trembled. Courage, rightly understood and lived, ensured that strength served order, faith, and the common good, rather than self or chaos. It was the active virtue that made the medieval knight and noble worthy of his spurs and the trust placed in him by God and Lord. The Citadel Code, the philosophy of the medieval knight and noble. Chapter 5. Piety, the sacred anchor. Piety formed the sacred anchor that steadied the knight and noble's entire existence amid the storms of medieval life. It placed every aspect of his armored world under the sovereign authority of God. Without piety, courage could become brutality, honor could harden into pride, and loyalty could devolve into blind ambition. With piety, the knight's sword became more than a weapon of steel. It served as an instrument of divine justice against chaos, tyranny, and unbelief. In the cold stone halls of the citadel, where wind howled through arrow slits and banners stirred faintly in the draught, piety reminded the knight daily that he was not his own master, but a servant of a higher king. The foundation of this piety rested in unwavering Christian orthodoxy. The knight and noble lived in an age when faith was not a private opinion, but the very framework of reality. He believed the universe operated under God's providence, and that earthly order mirrored the celestial hierarchy of angels, saints, and the divine throne. Feudal ranks, king above lord, lord above knight, knight above peasant, reflected this heavenly structure. To rebel against rightful authority was not merely treason, it was an offense against the divine pattern itself. This conviction gave the knight's life profound meaning and restraint. He did not fight for personal glory alone, but as a defender of Christendom, upholding the faith against pagans, heretics, or invaders who threatened the church. Daily life inside the Citadel revolved around religious observance. The knight rose before dawn for the first prayers of the day. He attended Mass in the Citadel's private chapel, often still wearing mail, or with his sword laid reverently upon the altar as an offering. The chaplain's words during the liturgy, Domine non sum dignus, echoed in his mind, reminding him of his own unworthiness despite his strength and status. After receiving the sacrament, he would kneel in silent prayer, dedicating the coming day's labors and potential battles to God's glory. This ritual was no empty formality. It anchored his soul before the demands of training, governance, or war tested his character. Piety shaped the knight's understanding of victory and defeat. On the battlefield, when lances splintered and war cries rose beneath fluttering banners, he fought with ferocity, yet never claimed sole credit for triumph. Victories were attributed to divine favor. The knight gave thanks in the chapel immediately afterward, offering captured standards or spoils to the church. Defeats, however bitter, were accepted as trials sent to refine the soul, much like gold tested by fire. This perspective prevented despair during long sieges when food ran low and enemy engines battered the walls. Instead of cursing fortune, the knight turned to prayer and penance, trusting that God's will ultimately prevailed. Such faith sustained morale within the Citadel when hope seemed lost. The ideal of the Mille Christi, soldier of Christ, stood at the heart of knightly piety. This concept gained particular force during the Crusades, when the Church called upon knights to recover the Holy Land. Pope Urban II's speech at Clermont in 1095 framed the crusade as a holy pilgrimage combined with armed service, promising spiritual rewards for those who fought with pure intention. The knight and noble embraced this calling. He saw his role not as mercenary, but as defender of the faith. Even in European conflicts that were not formal crusades, he often viewed his cause through a religious lens, defending the Church's rights, protecting monasteries and pilgrimage routes, or upholding Christian rulers against threats. The cross on his surcoat or shield was more than decoration. It proclaimed his allegiance to Christ above all earthly lords. Christian orthodoxy also guided the knight's moral conduct in war and peace. Piety demanded mercy where justice allowed. After a victorious siege, he might spare the lives of surrendering defenders who had fought honorably, especially if they agreed to ransom or conversion. Wholesale slaughter of civilians was discouraged by the code, though the brutal realities of medieval warfare sometimes tested these limits. Charity flowed naturally from faith. The knight ensured alms were distributed to the poor sheltered within the citadel during times of famine or invasion. He supported the chaplain and chapel upkeep, endowed masses for the souls of fallen comrades, and sometimes granted land to religious houses in gratitude for divine protection. Piety further acted as a check against the dangers of pride and vainglory. A knight who won renown in tournaments or battles could easily succumb to arrogance. Daily prayer and confession reminded him that all prowess came from God. Success belonged to heaven, the knight was merely the instrument. This humility preserved his soul and maintained discipline among his men. In the great hall, when minstrels sang of heroic deeds, the pious knight would redirect praise upward, insisting that God alone deserved glory. Such restraint elevated him above common soldiers and prevented the code of chivalry from degenerating into mere boasting or self-glorification. The integration of piety with martial life transformed the knight's vocation. Training with sword and lance was not secular exercise, but preparation to serve God more effectively. Horsemanship, strategy, and physical conditioning became acts of stewardship over the gifts God had granted. Even the design of the citadel reflected pious intent. Chapels built into towers, crosses carved above gateways, and relics housed for protection and inspiration. During sieges, the knight led processions within the walls, invoking saints and the Virgin Mary for deliverance. Faith became the ultimate defense when stone and steel reached their limits. Historical examples illustrated how deeply piety anchored the knightly ideal. William Marshall, the renowned English knight, balanced fierce battlefield prowess with genuine devotion. He founded religious houses, went on pilgrimage, and died in the habit of a Templar. Godfrey of Bouillon, leader of the First Crusade, refused the title King of Jerusalem out of humility, accepting only Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. These men embodied the Miles Christi ideal, warriors whose swords served the cross. Ramon Llull, in his Book of the Order of Chivalry, explicitly stated that the knight must love and fear God above all, defending the church and widows and orphans as part of his sacred duty. Piety also influenced the knight's relationships and governance. He treated his lord with reverence, not only out of feudal obligation, but because authority derived from God. Toward his family and vassals, he practiced charity and justice, informed by Christian teaching. In the Citadel's solar, or Great Hall, he might discuss theology with the chaplain, or listen to readings from Scripture and the lives of saints. These moments reinforced that his armored life was a holy vocation, not a profane occupation. Even courtly love, with its emphasis on purity and devotion, often drew inspiration from veneration of the Virgin Mary, blending romantic refinement with religious sentiment. In an age of constant uncertainty, plague, famine, invasion, and political upheaval, piety provided stability. The knight knew that earthly citadels could fall, kingdoms could crumble, and fortunes could reverse in a single battle. Only faith in God's eternal order remained unshakable. This conviction gave him courage to face overwhelming odds and humility to accept whatever outcome divine providence decreed. It prevented the philosophy of chivalry from becoming a purely secular code of honor and kept it firmly rooted in transcendent truth. Through piety, the warrior was elevated. The knight and noble no longer fought merely for land, title, or renown. He fought as a soldier of Christ, defending the faith, protecting the innocent, and upholding the divine order visible in the feudal world around him. His daily prayers, attendance at Mass, acts of charity, and dedication of his sword transformed martial existence into something sacred. In the torchlit chapel of the Citadel, with weapons laid upon the altar and the Latin chants rising toward the vaulted ceiling, the knight found his true strength, not in steel alone, but in submission to God's will. Piety, therefore, was no mere accessory to chivalry. It was the sacred anchor that prevented the entire code from drifting into pride, tyranny, or meaninglessness. It unified courage with mercy, loyalty with justice, and personal honor with eternal purpose. Without this religious foundation, the knight would have been little more than a skilled brute in expensive armor. With it, he became a living embodiment of the ideal that true nobility flows from alignment with divine order. In the stone citadel, where faith and steel met, piety ensured that strength served a higher calling, and that the medieval knight and noble walked his path not only as warrior, but as servant of God. The Citadel Code, the philosophy of the medieval knight and noble. Chapter 6. Defense of the weak, the sacred duty. The knight existed to shield those who could not shield themselves. As lord of the citadel, he protected women, children, widows, orphans, and peasants under his banner. This duty drove fair governance, merciful judgment, and swift rides against raiders. Generosity flowed from his stores in famine. Courtesy refined his conduct toward ladies and common folk alike. Protection was active. He cleared forests of bandits and strengthened village walls. Power served the vulnerable, not personal gain. In this, the knight fulfilled the core mandate of chivalry. The strong existed for the weak within God's ordained order. This sacred duty stood at the heart of chivalric philosophy. While the knight trained relentlessly for war and pledged unyielding loyalty to his lord, his highest calling was not conquest or personal glory, but the active defense of the defenseless. Medieval sources, from the Peace and Truce of God movements to treatises on knighthood, repeatedly emphasized that knights must protect the weak, particularly widows, orphans, women, children, and the poor. The Church played a key role in shaping this ideal, urging warriors to direct their violence outward against threats, rather than inward against the innocent populations they were sworn to safeguard. In the feudal world of the 12th to 15th centuries, society rested on a clear hierarchy. The knight and noble held land and arms in exchange for military service and governance. With that power came solemn responsibility. Peasants tilled the fields, paid rents and labor services, and looked to the citadel for protection during raids or wartime. Widows and orphans, often left without male protectors after battles or plagues, were especially vulnerable to exploitation by the strong. Chivalry explicitly forbade such abuse and commanded the knight to offer succor, aid, justice, and shelter. Daily life inside the citadel made this duty concrete. When a widow petitioned in the great hall, the knight listened and rendered judgment according to custom and canon law, ensuring she retained her dower lands or inheritance. Orphans received guardianship or placement in the household if needed. During harvest failures or after destructive raids, the knight opened granaries from the citadel stores, distributing grain to prevent starvation among the villagers. This generosity was not optional charity, but a recognized obligation of lordship. Failure to provide it risked divine displeasure and loss of honor. Protection extended far beyond charity. It demanded action. The knight organized and led armed patrols to clear nearby forests and roads of bandits who preyed on travelers and peasants. He inspected and repaired village defenses, stockades, ditches, and watchtowers, so that communities could better withstand sudden attacks. When larger threats appeared, such as a marauding band or an invading force practicing the chevauchée, a scorched earth raid designed to terrorize and weaken the enemy by destroying crops and villages, the knight rode out with his retinue to intercept and drive them off. His plate armor and banner served as visible symbols that the strong stood ready to shield the weak. Courtesy formed another vital expression of this duty, especially toward women. Courtly ideals taught the knight to treat ladies with respect and refinement, whether noble or of humbler station. This was not mere etiquette. It reflected the broader principle that the warrior must elevate his conduct to honor the vulnerable. In literature such as the Song of Roland, and in the practical expectations recorded in noble household rules, knights were instructed to show gentleness and graciousness to women while remaining fierce against those who would harm them. Historical figures embodied this ideal. William Marshall, celebrated as the greatest knight that ever lived, rose through tournaments and loyal service, yet consistently demonstrated concern for the welfare of those under his protection. As regent for the young Henry III, he defended the kingdom not only against foreign invasion, but also against internal chaos that would have left the weak exposed. His life illustrated that true chivalry balanced battlefield prowess with responsible governance and protection of the realm's most vulnerable inhabitants. Ramon Lull's Book of the Order of Chivalry, circa 1275, one of the most influential medieval treatises on the subject, stressed that the knight's strength and authority must be tempered with concern for those less able to defend themselves. Lull argued that a knight who used his power to oppress rather than protect betrayed the very purpose of his order. The knight was to act as God's instrument on earth, wielding the sword to uphold justice and shield the innocent. In times of siege, this duty intensified. When enemy forces encircled the citadel, the knight faced hard choices: Non-combatants, women, children, the elderly, and the sick, sometimes received safe conduct out of the fortress to conserve supplies for the fighting garrison, but only when feasible. More often, the citadel became a refuge, its thick walls and stores providing shelter for peasants fleeing surrounding villages. The knight coordinated the defense, ensuring that the stronghold held long enough for relief forces to arrive or for the enemy to withdraw. His voice, deep and commanding, rallied defenders while his decisions balanced military necessity with mercy wherever possible. Even in peacetime, the knight's role as protector shaped governance. He adjudicated disputes fairly so that the strong could not simply seize from the weak. He enforced just rents and labor services, preventing excessive demands that could ruin peasant families. He maintained roads and bridges so that trade and travel remained safe. These mundane responsibilities formed the quiet backbone of chivalric duty, less glamorous than tournament or crusade, yet essential to the ordered society the knight was sworn to uphold. The philosophy recognized human reality. Not every knight lived the ideal perfectly. Warfare remained brutal, and the code sometimes clashed with military necessity. Yet the persistent emphasis across chronicles, manuals, and oaths showed that chivalry aimed to restrain the warrior elite. It taught that raw power without moral direction descended into tyranny. The strong existed for the weak, not out of weakness, but because God had ordained a hierarchical order in which each station carried duties proportional to its privileges. Young squires raised in the citadel absorbed this lesson through example. They watched their lord hear petitions from humble folk, distribute alms, lead patrols against threats, and show measured courtesy. They learned that knighthood demanded more than skill at arms. It required a heart attuned to justice and compassion within the bounds of feudal and Christian duty. When the time came for dubbing, the new knight swore to uphold these principles, including the solemn vow to protect the defenseless. In the stone citadel, with its towers overlooking fields and villages, the knight stood as living guardian. His surcoat, bearing heraldic arms, proclaimed his lineage and vows to all who saw it. His sword, consecrated upon the chapel altar, symbolized the righteous use of force. Every act, whether riding against raiders, judging a land dispute, or opening stores during hardship, reinforced the central truth of his philosophy. Power found its noblest expression in service to those who could not wield it themselves. This sacred duty distinguished the medieval knight from mere mercenary or brigand. It elevated warfare into a vocation and lordship into stewardship. Within God's ordained order, the strong did not prey upon the weak. They shielded them. In fulfilling this mandate, the knight and noble not only preserved earthly society, but also aligned his soul with divine will. The citadel walls might crumble over centuries, yet the ideal they sheltered, that the powerful exist to defend the vulnerable, remained a cornerstone of chivalric philosophy. The Citadel Code, the philosophy of the medieval knight and noble. Chapter 7. Justice, power in service of righteousness. Justice required that strength serve righteousness, never whim or personal gain. In the Citadel's great hall, beneath high timbered roofs and flickering torchlight, the knight and noble weighed evidence and intent with solemn gravity. He punished the guilty to deter wrongdoing, while granting mercy to the truly repentant when justice allowed. He rejected tyranny outright, knowing that an unjust ruler invited the very chaos and disorder he was sworn to oppose. Custom and canon law guided his verdicts. A man's status carried due weight in feudal society, yet it did not override truth or fairness. Justice balanced severity with compassion, ensuring that order endured across the lands under his watch. The knight understood that without justice, the citadel was merely stone and steel, not a beacon of civilized rule worthy of loyalty and defense. This virtue stood at the heart of chivalric philosophy, because power without justice quickly descended into oppression. Ramon Lull, in his influential Book of the Order of Chivalry, circa 1275, made clear that knights existed to uphold and defend justice. Just as judges had the duty to render verdicts, knights had the responsibility to protect those judges from violence and to enforce righteous outcomes with the sword when necessary. The knight's blade, often forged in the shape of a cross, symbolized this dual edge, one side for mercy, the other for righteous force. Lull taught that chivalry must restore justice and truth through both love and fear, charity to instruct the willing, and stern correction for the wicked. Without this balance, society collapsed into cruelty, injury, disloyalty, and falseness. In the practical world of the medieval Citadel, justice was administered daily in the Great Hall, the administrative and social heart of the stronghold. This vast chamber, with its central hearth, raised dais for the lord or his representative, and long tables for retainers, served multiple purposes: feasts and council by night, hearings and judgments by day. Petitioners, peasants wronged by bandits, vassals disputing land boundaries, merchants cheated in trade, or families seeking redress for injury, approached the knight with deference. He listened carefully, questioning witnesses, examining oaths sworn on relics or the Gospels, and consulting local custom or written charters. Status mattered. A noble's word carried heavier weight than a serf's in many cases, reflecting the hierarchical order of feudal society. Yet truth remained paramount. A knight who favored the powerful unjustly risked losing honor and the loyalty of those he governed. Feudal justice drew from multiple sources. Customary law, rooted in long-standing local traditions and Germanic precedents, handled most everyday matters such as theft, assault, property disputes, and breaches of service obligations. Canon law, drawn from Gratian's decretum and church teachings, influenced cases involving marriage, inheritance, oaths, and moral offenses, especially where the church held overlapping authority. Royal or higher feudal courts might intervene in serious crimes or appeals, but within his own citadel and lands, the knight often acted as the primary dispenser of justice. He balanced these systems to maintain peace. Punishments fit the crime and the offender's station, fines or restitution for lesser wrongs, corporal penalties or imprisonment for graver offences, and in extreme cases, such as treason or repeated banditry, execution to protect the community. Mercy tempered severity. A first-time offender showing genuine remorse might receive a lighter sentence or pardon, reinforcing the knight's image as a fair but firm ruler. Historical figures embodied this ideal in practice. William Marshall, celebrated as the greatest knight that ever lived, demonstrated justice alongside his renowned courage and loyalty. As regent of England during the minority of Henry III, Marshall navigated civil war and French invasion with a commitment to lawful order. He issued pardons where possible, upheld feudal rights without descending into tyranny, and helped lay groundwork for documents like Magna Carta, which emphasized swift and impartial justice while limiting arbitrary royal power. Marshall's life showed that a knight could wield authority responsibly, using his influence to stabilize the realm rather than exploit it. His reputation for fairness earned him respect across factions, proving that justice strengthened rather than weakened a leader's position. The knight's approach to justice reflected the broader medieval conviction that earthly rule mirrored divine order. God was the ultimate judge. Kings ruled by divine right. Lords and knights executed justice on the ground as stewards of that authority. Neglecting this duty invited divine displeasure and earthly disorder, raids, rebellions, or loss of vassal loyalty. In the Citadel, justice therefore served multiple ends. It deterred crime, resolved conflicts peacefully, reinforced social hierarchy, and upheld the knight's honor. A reputation for fairness attracted loyal followers and prosperous tenants. Injustice drove people away or provoked resistance. Training in justice began early. As a page and squire, the young knight observed his lord or senior knights presiding over hearings. He learned to distinguish genuine grievances from petty disputes driven by greed or revenge. He studied the virtues that supported just rule, prudence to weigh evidence carefully, temperance to avoid rash judgments, and humility to admit when higher authority or further inquiry was needed. Ramon Llull stressed that knights must defend judges from violence so that justice could proceed unhindered. In practice, this meant the Citadel's garrison stood ready to enforce verdicts, whether collecting fines or escorting prisoners. Challenges tested the knights' commitment to justice. During times of war or siege, resources strained and tempers flared. Maintaining fair distribution of supplies or punishing deserters required stern yet equitable measures. In peacetime, powerful vassals might pressure him to favor their claims, testing his integrity. Bribery or favoritism tempted many, but the true knight resisted, knowing that corrupted justice eroded the very foundations of the feudal bond. Custom provided safeguards, oaths, trial by combat in certain cases, though increasingly distrusted by the later Middle Ages, or compurgation, where supporters swore to a man's character. Canon law offered appeals to ecclesiastical courts in appropriate matters. The knight navigated these systems with care, seeking consistency rather than perfect uniformity. For medieval law varied by region and lordship. Generosity and mercy formed essential counterparts to strict justice. A knight who showed compassion to the repentant or aided widows and orphans in inheritance disputes fulfilled chivalric duty while strengthening community bonds. Ramon Llull reminded knights that justice included restoring charity and instruction to the world. Thus, the knight might reduce a fine for a poor family or grant land to a loyal retainer's widow. Such acts were not weakness but wise exercise of power, demonstrating that righteousness included benevolence. Without justice, the citadel lost its moral authority. Stone walls and armed men could enforce obedience through fear alone for a time, but lasting loyalty required belief in fair rule. Peasants worked harder on lands they trusted would be protected justly. Vassals fought more willingly for a lord known for equity. Justice transformed the knight from mere warrior into guardian of civilized order. It elevated brute force into legitimate authority and aligned the sword with the cross. In the torchlit great hall, as petitioners knelt and banners stirred overhead, the knight and noble embodied this philosophy. Each verdict reaffirmed the chivalric ideal. Power existed to serve righteousness. He weighed not only facts but souls, intent, circumstance, and capacity for reform. Severity protected the innocent, mercy offered redemption. Through consistent justice, he upheld the divine and feudal order, ensuring that strength remained a force for good rather than chaos. This chapter of the knight's philosophy reminds us that true nobility lies in restraint. The armed elite of medieval Europe faced constant temptation to abuse their power. Chivalry provided the moral framework to resist it. Justice, balanced with the other virtues, honor, loyalty, courage, piety, and defense of the weak, created stable realms amid an often violent age. In the Citadel, where wind whistled through arrow slits and the weight of responsibility pressed upon armored shoulders, the knight strove daily to make power righteous. In doing so, he fulfilled the highest calling of his order, to defend not only bodies, but the very idea of lawful, ordered society under God. The Citadel Code, the philosophy of the medieval knight and noble. Chapter 8. Temperance, Prudence, and Humility, the refining virtues. Temperance and prudence kept courage from becoming folly. The knight avoided needless conflict and weighed risks before action. Humility tempered glory. He gave thanks in chapel rather than boasting in hall. True nobility lay in quiet perseverance, not loud acclaim. These virtues prevented pride from undermining the code. Self-mastery turned the knight inward, ensuring outward prowess served higher purpose rather than ego. In the medieval citadel, where courage could easily spill into recklessness and victory could breed dangerous arrogance, Temperance, prudence, and humility acted as essential refining fires. They polished the raw steel of martial virtue into something enduring and noble. Without these quieter virtues, the knight's strength risked descending into tyranny or self-destruction. Ramon Llull, in his influential Book of the Order of Chivalry, circa 1275, emphasized that chivalry demanded not only valor, but moderation, wisdom, and a humble recognition of one's place in the divine order. These three virtues formed a necessary counterbalance to the more outward-facing pillars of courage, loyalty, and justice explored in earlier chapters. Temperance, mastery over desire and excess. Temperance taught the knight self-control in all things: food, drink, anger, pleasure, and even glory itself. It was the virtue that moderated the passions, so they did not rule the man. In an age when feasts in the great hall could stretch long into the night with abundant wine and roasted meats, the temperate knight ate and drank with restraint. He understood that excess dulled the senses, weakened the body for battle, and clouded judgment. Ramon Llull warned that a knight consumed by gluttony or lust corrupted the very order he was sworn to uphold. Temperance kept the body strong and the mind clear for the demands of siege defense or sudden campaign. This virtue extended far beyond the table. In tournament or melee, a temperate knight knew when to press an advantage and when to show mercy to a fallen opponent. He avoided pointless duels born of petty insults, recognizing that true strength lay in restraint as much as in force. During long sieges within the Citadel walls, when supplies ran low and tempers flared, temperance helped maintain discipline among the garrison. The knight led by example, rationing his own portions and calming hot-headed young squires who wished to sally forth prematurely. Temperance also governed speech and emotion. Uncouth words or outbursts of rage were beneath the knight's dignity. Llull stressed that courtesy and chivalry belonged together. Baseness and uncouth behavior contradicted the entire code. In the Citadel's solar or council chamber, the temperate knight spoke measuredly, listening more than he proclaimed. This self-mastery prevented small grievances from escalating into feuds that could fracture alliances or weaken the lord's domain. Prudence, the virtue of wise judgment. Prudence, often called the charioteer of the virtues, involved foresight, discernment, and the practical wisdom to choose the right course at the right time. It prevented courage from becoming foolhardy and loyalty from becoming blind. The prudent knight weighed risks before committing men or resources. He studied the terrain, assessed the enemy's strength, and considered the long-term consequences of every decision, whether in battle, governance, or personal conduct. In the Citadel, prudence guided daily administration. When hearing petitions from peasants or vassals in the Great Hall, the knight did not rush to judgment. He gathered facts, consulted trusted counselors, and considered custom alongside mercy. During military campaigns, he advised his lord against reckless charges, favoring instead ambushes, fortified positions, or negotiated truces when victory seemed too costly. Historical figures like William Marshall exemplified this virtue. Despite his legendary prowess in tournaments and battles, Marshall repeatedly demonstrated prudent restraint, choosing loyalty to his sworn lord even when shifting allegiances might have brought quicker personal gain, and carefully navigating the treacherous politics of the English court across multiple reigns. Prudence demanded education and reflection. Many knights, though primarily men of the sword, listened to chronicles read aloud in the hall or sought counsel from chaplains and learned clerks. They understood that raw bravery without wisdom led to unnecessary death and the ruin of lands. In siege warfare, the prudent knight conserved supplies, repaired walls methodically, and planned relief efforts rather than wasting lives in desperate sorties. He recognized that true victory often lay in endurance and clever strategy, rather than glorious but costly charges. This virtue also applied inward. Prudence helped the knight examine his own motives. Was a proposed action driven by righteous duty or hidden pride? Did it serve God, Lord, and the common good, or merely personal renown? By cultivating prudent self-awareness, the knight ensured his outward deeds aligned with the higher purposes of chivalry. Humility, the antidote to pride. Humility stood as the crowning refining virtue. It reminded the knight that all his prowess, noble birth, and victories came ultimately from God. Pride was the great enemy of chivalry. Lull explicitly stated that the order of chivalry was founded on justice and humility to protect the humble against the proud. An arrogant knight who boasted of his deeds or lauded his status over others undermined the very hierarchy he claimed to defend. In practice, humility manifested in quiet gratitude. After a successful defense of the Citadel or a victorious tournament, the knight gave thanks first in the chapel, rather than seeking acclaim in the hall. He attributed success to divine favor, the skill of his comrades, and the steadfastness of the garrison, not solely to his own arm. William Marshall again provides a model. Though celebrated as the greatest knight, he remained loyal and service-oriented, avoiding the boastfulness that ruined many lesser men. Humility also shaped interactions across social ranks. The knight treated squires with firm but patient guidance, peasants with justice and generosity, and defeated enemies, when honor allowed, with measured respect. He did not disdain manual labor when it served the citadel, helping repair a breached wall or tend horses in extremity. This grounded spirit prevented the warrior elite from becoming detached tyrants. Within the daily rhythm of citadel life, humility reinforced all other virtues. It kept courage from arrogance, loyalty from servile flattery, and justice from harshness. The humble knight accepted correction from his lord or chaplain without resentment. He persevered through defeats without despair, recognizing them as opportunities for growth rather than stains on his reputation. The interwoven power of the refining virtues. Temperance, prudence, and humility did not stand alone. They reinforced one another and the bolder virtues of the code. Temperance provided the inner discipline that made prudence possible. Only a self-controlled man could judge situations clearly. Prudence, in turn, guided the application of temperance and humility in real circumstances. Humility ensured that all these efforts remained oriented towards service rather than self-glorification. In the training yard, these virtues appeared together. The knight practiced relentlessly, but avoided showy excess that risked injury. He advised younger men prudently on technique and humbled himself by demonstrating fundamentals repeatedly. During feasts, he moderated his own enjoyment while ensuring the hall remained orderly and generous. In council, he offered wise counsel without dominating, yielding to the Lord's final word with humble obedience. These refining virtues also sustained the knight through the long years. Many knights lived into their 50s or 60s, a considerable age in medieval times, precisely because temperance preserved their health, prudence guided their choices, and humility kept them grounded amid changing fortunes. They understood that chivalry was a lifelong habitus, not a youthful burst of glory. Young pages and squires learned these virtues by observation more than formal lecture. They watched their lord kneel in chapel after victory, consult advisors before decisions, and eat moderately while ensuring others were fed. In this way, the refining virtues passed from generation to generation within the citadel's stone walls, ensuring the code remained balanced and sustainable. Without temperance, prudence, and humility, the knight's courage risked becoming brutality, his loyalty blind obedience, and his justice cruel tyranny. With them, martial prowess served the divine and feudal order rather than destroying it. These quieter virtues transformed the armed noble from a mere warrior into a true guardian, strong enough to protect, wise enough to know when and how, and humble enough to remember why. In the torchlit halls and shadowed battlements of the medieval citadel, temperance, prudence, and humility stood as silent sentinels. They refined the knight and noble daily, ensuring that his strength remained a blessing to the realm rather than a curse. Through them, the full splendor of chivalric philosophy shone, not raw power, but power perfectly ordered by wisdom, restraint, and submission to God. The Citadel Code, the philosophy of the medieval knight and noble. Chapter 9. Daily life in the Citadel, the philosophy lived. Inside the Citadel, the philosophy was not theory, but habit. Dawn brought weapons practice, terce brought prayer, noon brought judgment, evening brought counsel and feast. Every act, training squires, repairing walls, hearing petitions, embodied the code. The knight's surcoat, sword, and banner proclaimed his vows to all who saw them. Siege or peace, the citadel remained both fortress and school of virtue, where young men learned that knighthood demanded soul as well as steel. The rhythm of life within the citadel followed the canonical hours of the church, blending military readiness, spiritual devotion, and feudal governance into a seamless whole. Long before sunrise, the watchman's horn or the tolling of the chapel bell roused the garrison. Servants stirred first, lighting fires in the kitchens and great hall, sweeping rushes from the floors, and preparing a simple morning meal of bread, ale, and perhaps cold meat left from the previous evening. The knight and noble rose with discipline, often beginning his day in the chill of the chapel for matins or early mass. Kneeling in armor or simple tunic, he offered prayers that reminded him his strength belonged to God. This act of piety anchored the entire day, reinforcing that every blow struck and every judgment rendered served a higher purpose. As light broke over the battlements, the training yard came alive. The knight, accompanied by his squires and pages, moved to the bailey or lists for weapons practice. Sword drills against wooden posts or partners sharpened reflexes honed since boyhood. Young pages, often sent to the citadel at age 7, learned basic horsemanship and archery, while squires, typically aged 14 and upward, assisted their knight by polishing armor, cleaning weapons, and holding the lance during mounted exercises. The knight demonstrated strikes, parries, and footwork, correcting form with stern but patient instruction. "A weak arm fails your lord and your God," he might say, emphasizing that prowess without discipline invited defeat and dishonor. Horsemanship followed, riding circuits, tilting at the quintain, and practicing charges that simulated battlefield conditions. These sessions built not only physical endurance, but the courage and self-mastery central to chivalric philosophy. By mid-morning, around the hour of terce, the community gathered again for prayer. The Citadel Chapel, often a small but richly appointed space with painted walls depicting saints or biblical scenes, filled with the knight, his lord, family, retainers, and servants. Latin chants rose amid incense, and the knight renewed his commitment to defend the faith. After Mass, a more substantial meal might be taken in the great hall or solar, bread, porridge, fish, or meat, depending on the liturgical calendar, and wine or ale. Meals were not mere sustenance. They reinforced hierarchy and courtesy. The knight observed proper manners, ensuring juniors learned the refinement that tempered raw warrior spirit. Noon brought the serious work of governance. In the great hall, with its high ceiling, tapestries, and long tables, the knight and noble sat in council or held court. Petitions from vassals and peasants arrived, disputes over land boundaries, complaints of theft, requests for aid during hardship. The knight listened gravely, weighing evidence according to custom and canon law. Justice here embodied the code, punishing the guilty without cruelty, showing mercy where repentance appeared genuine, and ensuring the weak received protection. Administrative duties followed, reviewing accounts of the estate, inspecting stores of grain and salted meat against future siege, and directing repairs to walls, towers, or the drawbridge. Every decision reflected loyalty to the Lord and responsibility for those under his shield. Afternoons often turned to practical military preparation. In peacetime, the knight oversaw maintenance of siege engines, stockpiling of arrows and stones, and drilling of the garrison. Guards rotated on the walls, operating the portcullis and drawbridge while scanning the horizon for threats. Hunting parties might ride out, falconry or chasing boar and deer, providing both food and training in horsemanship and tracking. These excursions tested courage and reinforced bonds among comrades. Back within the walls, the knight might instruct squires in the finer points of chivalry, tales from the Song of Roland, lessons on courtly conduct, or the importance of generosity. Young men absorbed that knighthood required more than skill at arms. It demanded honor in victory and restraint in defeat. As evening approached, vespers called the household once more to prayer. The day's labors paused for reflection, gratitude for protection granted, and supplication for strength in future trials. Supper in the great hall followed, a more communal and often lavish affair. Torches and candles illuminated the space as servants carried platters of roasted meats, fish, vegetables, and spiced wines. The knight sat according to rank, engaging in conversation that mixed strategy, stories of past campaigns, and moral instruction. Minstrels or troubadours might perform chansons, celebrating heroic deeds, reinforcing the ideals of loyalty and courage. Feasts celebrated alliances, marked holy days, or simply rewarded the household's diligence. Through these shared meals, the philosophy lived. Generosity from the strong sustained the community, while courtesy and good cheer maintained harmony. Night brought the final watches. The night ensured sentries stood ready, rotating shifts so men could rest. In times of peace, the citadel grew quieter, though never fully silent. Dogs barked, wind whistled through arrow slits, and the occasional clank of armor echoed as guards patrolled. The knight might retire to his chamber or the solar, reviewing the day's events or consulting with his lord on matters of estate and defense. Sleep came in shifts for many, especially during periods of tension, reminding all that vigilance was itself an act of loyalty and courage. Even during siege, the philosophy endured with heightened intensity. When enemy banners appeared and the drawbridge rose, every resident contributed. Knights commanded defenses from the battlements, directing archers and engineers while conserving supplies. Prayer intensified as spiritual strength bolstered physical resistance. Rations were shared equitably, embodying justice and generosity. The citadel became a crucible where the code was tested, courage under arrow fire, loyalty when hope faded, and piety that turned suffering into offering. Throughout all seasons and circumstances, the citadel functioned as both fortress and school. Young pages and squires learned by observation and direct instruction. They saw the knight rise early for prayer and training, render fair judgments at noon, and preside with dignity at evening feasts. They learned that the surcoat bearing heraldic arms was no mere decoration, but a public declaration of vows, honor, loyalty, courage, and defense of the weak. Failures in conduct brought correction. Successes earned quiet approval. In this living environment, abstract virtues became concrete habits. The knight understood that his daily routine was philosophy made flesh. Weapons practice cultivated prowess for protection, not domination. Prayer aligned strength with divine will. Governance upheld justice and order. Feasts fostered community and generosity. Every repaired wall, every trained squire, every merciful judgment reinforced the central truth. The armed noble existed to serve God, Lord, and the common good. In peace he prepared for war. In war he defended the order that made peace possible. Thus the citadel stood as more than stone and timber. It was a living embodiment of chivalric philosophy, where dawn to dusk labor, spiritual observance, and feudal duty wove together into a coherent way of life. Siege or peace, the knight and noble carried the code in his heart and displayed it in every action. Here young men learned that true knighthood required not only a strong arm, but a disciplined soul. The citadel's walls might crumble in time, but the habits formed within them, honor kept, loyalty sworn, courage shown, and the weak defended, endured as the lasting legacy of the medieval knight and noble. The Citadel Code, the philosophy of the medieval knight and noble. Chapter 10, the enduring legacy of knightly philosophy. Across centuries, the knight and noble's code outlived kingdoms and sieges. It taught that martial elites could be tamed by virtue, that strength rightly ordered served the common good, and that faith, honor, and duty created lasting stability. Though armor changed and castles crumbled, the philosophy remained a model of disciplined manhood in service to God and realm. In every age, men of arms who embraced these timeless ideals, honor, loyalty, courage, piety, protection, and justice, became pillars against disorder. The citadel may stand in ruin, but the code it sheltered endures as long as men remember that true power bows to higher purpose. The legacy of chivalric philosophy began even before the medieval period fully waned. By the late 14th and 15th centuries, as plate armor reached its technical peak and gunpowder weapons started to reshape warfare, the practical role of the mounted knight diminished. Yet the ideals did not fade. Instead, they found new life in literature and courtly culture. Arthurian romances, chansons de geste, and tales of Charlemagne's paladins spread across Europe, immortalizing the knight as a figure of courage, loyalty, and piety. These stories were not mere entertainment. They served as moral instruction for young nobles. In the great halls that replaced crumbling citadels, lords and ladies listened to recitations that reinforced the code. A true knight fought for justice, protected the innocent, and remained faithful, even unto death. One of the most powerful embodiments of this living legacy was William Marshall, often hailed as the greatest knight that ever lived. Born in the mid-12th century to a minor noble family, Marshall rose through tournament prowess, loyal service to 5 English kings, and unwavering adherence to his oaths. He fought in the Crusades, became a Templar on his deathbed, and served as regent of England, helping stabilize the realm after the death of King John. His life demonstrated that the chivalric virtues were not abstract theory. Loyalty kept him steadfast through shifting alliances. Courage carried him through hundreds of tournaments and battlefield victories. Honor prevented him from breaking faith, even when kings proved unworthy. Marshall's story, preserved in his biography, became a model for later generations. Chroniclers praised him as the flower of chivalry, showing that a man could rise from humble beginnings to shape history by living the code. As the Renaissance dawned, chivalric philosophy influenced the ideal of the gentleman. In England and across Europe, the concept of nobility evolved, but retained core knightly elements. Courtesy, honor, and service to the crown echoed the old feudal loyalties. Courtly manners, once part of the refinement of the knight toward ladies, became markers of civilized conduct. Even as feudal levies gave way to professional armies, military leaders invoked chivalric ideals to maintain discipline and morale. The code helped restrain excesses in an age when warfare could still descend into brutality. Treaties and customs regarding the treatment of prisoners and non-combatants carried faint echoes of the knight's duty to show mercy where justice allowed. The Enlightenment and industrial eras seemed to distance society from medieval ways, yet the philosophy persisted in subtler forms. Military academies and officer corps in European armies continued to emphasize honor, courage, and duty. Codes of conduct for soldiers drew indirectly from the chivalric tradition of the warrior who fights with restraint and purpose rather than savagery. In Britain, the concept of the gentleman officer, who led by example, protected the weak, and upheld regimental honor, owed much to the knightly model. Across the Atlantic, early American military traditions similarly valued personal integrity and courage in defense of higher principles. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, a romantic revival of chivalry swept through literature and culture. Victorian writers and artists idealized the medieval knight as a symbol of moral strength in an increasingly industrialized world. Novels, poetry, and paintings portrayed knights as defenders of virtue against modern ills. While some aspects became sentimentalized, the core message endured. True manhood involves self-mastery, protection of the vulnerable, and service to something greater than oneself. Organizations such as fraternal orders and youth groups drew inspiration from knightly ideals to instill discipline and character in young men. Even in the brutal wars of the 20th century, echoes of the code appeared. Soldiers spoke of honor, loyalty to comrades, and courage under fire. Military ethics, including rules for the humane treatment of prisoners and civilians, trace conceptual roots to the medieval effort to restrain knightly violence through virtue. Modern law of armed conflict, with its principles of distinction, proportionality, and necessity, carries forward the spirit, if not the letter, of chivalric restraint. The idea that the strong must adhere to higher standards when wielding power remains a direct descendant of the knight's philosophy. Today, the Citadel Code continues to offer timeless wisdom. In an age of rapid technological change and shifting social structures, the virtues of honor, loyalty, courage, piety, protection, and justice provide a moral anchor. Honor demands integrity when no one is watching. Loyalty calls for steadfastness to worthy causes and people. Courage requires facing difficulties with resolve, whether on the battlefield, in the workplace, or in personal trials. Piety, understood broadly as reverence for something greater than self, counters selfishness. The duty to protect the weak reminds those with power or influence of their responsibility to the vulnerable. Justice insists that strength serve righteousness rather than convenience. The philosophy teaches that disciplined manhood is not about domination, but about ordered service. It shows that martial or physical strength finds its highest expression when guided by moral purpose. Men who embrace these ideals, whether soldiers, leaders, fathers, or ordinary citizens, become stabilizing forces in their communities. They model the truth that real power bows to higher purpose. Faith in God or transcendent principles, duty to family and society, and commitment to justice. The ruined citadels of Europe stand as silent witnesses. Their stones, weathered by time, no longer house armored knights. Yet the code they once sheltered lives on in stories, traditions, and the quiet choices of individuals who choose virtue over expediency. From William Marshall's battlefield triumphs and political service to the romantic tales that inspired centuries of readers, the knight and noble's philosophy demonstrates remarkable resilience. Its endurance proves a profound lesson. External forms, armor, castles, feudal oaths, may pass away, but the inner discipline of character remains relevant. In every era, societies face threats from disorder, whether from external enemies or internal moral decay. The chivalric response was to tame the strong through virtue, rather than weaken them through unchecked license. This approach created stability that outlasted many kingdoms, as long as men remember that courage without honor becomes brutality, loyalty without justice becomes tyranny, and strength without piety becomes arrogance. The Citadel Code will continue to guide. It calls each generation to examine whether their power serves a higher good. It challenges the capable to protect rather than exploit, to lead with integrity rather than self-interest, and to face adversity with faith and resolve. The knight and noble of old stood within stone walls, sword at side, banner overhead, embodying a philosophy that transformed potential chaos into ordered strength. That same spirit can inspire today. The citadel may lie in ruins, but the code endures in the heart of any man who chooses to live by honor, loyalty, courage, piety, protection, and justice. True power, the philosophy reminds us, is not the ability to break others, but the strength to uphold what is right, even when it costs dearly. In this way, the medieval knight and noble's legacy remains a beacon for disciplined manhood and moral order across the ages.